Now, you already know by now that these approach charts are your ticket for a safe path from the comfortable en route environment to a landing at your destination airport. So let's talk about the pieces that make up an approach procedure so that you'll understand what to expect when you do fly one. Now, approaches are designed to allow you to fly from an en route altitude to one low enough where you can see the runway and land even in low ceilings and visibilities. So an approach is a three-dimensional proposition involving courses over the ground as well as a descent profile. Now, when an approach designer puts together a specific procedure for an airport, that designer thinks in terms of four separate phases. The first phase is the initial approach segment, and that's where you transition from the en route structure. Next is the intermediate approach segment, and that's where you're configuring for descent and landing. And the final approach segment is where you're aligning with the runway and getting down to the lowest safe altitude. Now, if you cannot see the runway or airport environment, then you'd be using the missed approach segment, which gives you a clear path out of there. Now, the initial approach segment begins, and are you ready for this? Well, it begins at an initial approach fix, which you'll find labeled on the chart as IAF. Now, an initial approach fix may be a nav aid, an intersection, or a waypoint, and it may or may not be on an airway. But if it's not on an airway, then they're going to have to help you figure out how to get to the initial approach fix. Here at Silex, which you can see as initial approach fix, they give you a feeder route, and a feeder route will give you an altitude, a course, and a distance. Now, an approach can have several different initial approach fixes, and as a result, there could be several ways you could start the approach. Here we have an initial approach fix at Silex, Fillmore, and Ventura. Well, when you do your planning, you'd normally choose the one that's most convenient for your route. Now, initial approach segments are usually less than 50 miles long, and they guarantee you at least 1,000 feet of obstacle clearance. And the initial approach segment ends at an intermediate fix, or it may end when you've finished a procedure turn or other turnaround maneuver to the final approach course. So after the initial approach segment comes the intermediate approach segment. Now, during the intermediate approach segment, you can be a really busy pilot. You know, you're slowing down, you're getting ready to land. So the people that plan these approaches know that, and they design the intermediate segment so that your course is never more than 30 degrees from your final approach course, and they make sure that there are no steep descents. Now, while you're on this intermediate segment, you are guaranteed at least 500 feet of obstacle clearance. The intermediate segment ends at the final approach fix. Now, the initial and intermediate segments really can vary a lot for different approaches. And some approaches don't even have an intermediate segment. But every approach will always have a final approach segment, which begins at the final approach fix and ends at the missed approach point. Now, the final approach fix can be any number of things. It could be a nav aid, it could be a DME fix, it could be an intersection, it could be a waypoint, or on an ILS approach, it could be the point where you intercept the glide slope. Now, since your goal on final approach is to see that runway even when the weather's really bad, final approach is where you have the lowest obstacle clearance. In fact, on final approach, the minimum obstacle clearance for non-precision approaches can be as low as 250 feet, and on ILS approaches it can be less than 150 feet. And all that means this is really no time to have the needles waving around and to be off altitude. Now, on any approach, you'll always have a missed approach segment as your escape route in case you just can't see that runway. Well, the climbs, headings, and courses of the missed approach segment are all designed to do one thing for you, and that's to get you safely away from the ground while you prepare for your next step. Now, for that reason, it's essential that you study the missed approach procedure in advance and memorize the initial climb and heading instructions. Now, missed approach procedures begin at the missed approach point, and they'll end at some fix where you may hold awaiting further clearance. Now, the FAA designs approaches with the same care and detail that engineers design into a bridge. That care and those details provide you with an approach that delivers you via a safe path through the clouds to an airport every time.